While training in the forest, professional bike racer Antonio found himself being pursued by a massive brown bear, ultimately leading to him falling off his bike. Surprisingly, the bear did not attack. Instead, it simply waited for him to regain consciousness. Antonio sensed that something was amiss with the animal, and he would soon discover that it was in need of assistance. He could hardly believe what he was about to uncover. Feeling reassured that the bear posed no threat, Antonio cautiously approached the creature, though his heart raced in his chest. As he drew nearer, he noticed its unusual behavior, indicating that something was wrong. It clearly needed help, but how could he possibly assist such a powerful animal? Then, Antonio spotted it, and his eyes widened in realization. Suddenly, everything clicked into place regarding the bear's pursuit. He understood he had to act swiftly, but questions flooded his mind. Why had the bear chased him? Why had it chosen not to attack? And what kind of help did it require? To prepare for competition, Antonio frequently embarked on all-day biking sessions, often choosing the highway that wound through the vast forests of Alaska, where traffic was minimal. He was aware of the potential dangers lurking in these woods, but always believed that if he encountered any threats, he could simply outrun them on his racing bike. Until now, this strategy had worked well for him, but today would prove to be different as he faced a danger he desperately wanted to avoid. As he neared the end of an exhausting 8-hour ride, Antonio was heading home, completely drained. This was meant to be his final intense training session before the upcoming competition, but he was unprepared for what lay ahead. Suddenly, a massive figure emerged from the thick brush, moving toward him on all fours. Antonio swerved to the left, finally recognizing the creature, a gigantic brown bear, and he had nearly collided with it. Regaining his composure, he glanced back and saw the bear still looming menacingly behind him. In an instant, the bear shifted into a full sprint, charging toward him for another potential collision. Antonio felt paralyzed by fear, but he knew he had to act fast to avoid becoming the target of a brutal attack. As Antonio let out a blood-curdling scream and mounted his bike, he sped away as fast as he could from the vicinity of the bear. Adrenaline coursed through his veins as he pedaled for his life, feeling the bear creeping up on him. No matter how fast he went, he knew he would only be able to bike a little further, as his legs were getting tired and he was beginning to feel as if he would pass out. His mind raced as he tried to come up with a plan. It was difficult to focus when all he could think about was the possibility that his life might soon come to an end. Left with no other options, Antonio decided to make a swift decision. He took a sharp right turn, which led him into a part of the woods lined with untamed bushes and trees. It was hard for him to navigate the terrain, but it seemed to be slowing the bear down somewhat. Antonio pedaled forward, dodging the low-hanging branches and pacing each breath so as not to black out from exhaustion. Just as he was beginning to feel confident in his escape, the front wheel of his bike hit a vicious bump in the road. Antonio tumbled forward, his bike collapsing underneath him. The fall was painful and knocked the wind out of him. As he coughed and tried to regain his balance, he was met with an overwhelming fear of what was to come. The bear was only a few yards away, and it wouldn't be long before he was face to face with it. The stress and anxiety made him woozy, and he sank into unconsciousness as he heard the rustling of the bear's footsteps closer than they had ever been before. There was no real evidence as to how much time had passed while Antonio was unconscious. He awoke in a daze, his drooping eyelids fighting the bright sunlight that beamed down on him. He couldn't believe how lucky he was to still be breathing. Very slowly, he rose and looked around for his bike. He noticed something rather jarring out of the corner of his eye. He saw the large brown paws of the bear next to the collapsed form of his bike. With his stomach churning in fear, he took in the whole of the bear. What he noticed next was strange and wholly unexpected. His initial thought was that the bear would immediately attack him upon seeing him stand up, but the bear's reaction was the complete opposite. He simply sat there, eyeing the man curiously for a moment, not moving. Antonio didn't know what to think or do at that moment. As he continued to stare back at the bear, he noticed the creature was making low sounds at him, almost a cry. Was the bear in pain? It wasn't moving, and it seemed to be avoiding rising to its feet, so Antonio could only assume its trek through the woods was just as treacherous as his own. Antonio felt the soreness in his body, wincing as he touched his tender ribs, scratched elbows and knees. His head throbbed painfully, and he knew he needed medical attention. but getting past the bear without being too close was impossible. The bear's whimpering made him feel sympathy, but he couldn't see what was wrong with it. To find out, he would have to get much closer, raising concerns for his safety. Testing the waters, he cautiously began to retreat. The bear rose to all fours and moved closer, appearing less menacing than before. Feeling a surge of courage, Antonio stepped forward, observing the bear's reaction. It stood still, maintaining eye contact, waiting for him to make the next move. Antonio continued to approach slowly, careful to avoid any sticks that might provoke an attack. After a few steps, the man and creature were almost touching. Antonio's heart leaped into his throat. Muttering a quick prayer, Antonio reached out and rested his hand on top of the bear's head, feeling its coarse fur part between his fingertips. Miraculously, the bear responded positively to this, leading into his touch and closing its eyes. It lowered its body to the ground, appearing grateful for the gentle touch. None of this was making sense to Antonio. Bears did not necessarily want to hurt human beings. He knew this well, but they also were not known to be the friendliest of animals to encounter in the woods. He knew the bear must be in desperate need of help, and he was the only one who could assist it. As the bear continued to rest at his feet, Antonio took the opportunity to step away and inspect the state of his bike. There was no way he would be able to ride it anywhere to retrieve help, but at least he could do one thing. He had a bottle of water attached to the bike, and thankfully it was still there even after the crash. He brought it over to the bear, hoping some cool water would benefit it. He poured the water in front of the bear, and it reached out to swat the stream a little. Antonio took this as a friendly sign and relaxed a little. The bear stretched its head forward and began licking at the water thirstily. Antonio could tell this was providing it with some relief. However, he was still in the dark as to what had injured it in the first place. Deep in the forest, Antonio clutched his phone, uncertain if he would have any cell service in this remote area. He hoped to call the wildlife rescue line for professional help for the injured bear. Digging through his pockets, he retrieved his phone, which bore a few cracks from his fall. Fortunately, it was still functional, but the battery was critically low, with less than 10% remaining. He worried it might die before he could secure assistance. Despite the spotty service, he dialed for help, grateful that he could at least try. As he knelt beside the bear, it let out a small groan, drawing Antonio's attention. He noticed something lodged in one of its paws, causing it to bleed profusely. Antonio gasped and leaned in for a closer look, but the bear flinched, instinctively nursing its injured paw and shielding it from him. Suddenly, everything clicked. The bear had been chasing him out of fear and pain, likely believing he was the one who had harmed it. Fortunately, Antonio managed to contact the park ranger's office and report the situation. Eventually, help arrived, and the bear was treated by a local vet. It made a full recovery, and although Antonio missed some races, he quickly returned to top form, racing on a new bike.